Hey Changemaker! Welcome to Learning for Good, the only podcast that teaches nonprofit leaders how to leverage training to drive performance, improve capacity, and fuel their mission impact. Do you ever feel like your nonprofit is growing, but your people just aren't keeping up? Or like you're fixing the same problems over and over? Do you wonder how to build confident, capable staff who know how to lead, not just execute? If we haven't met yet, I'm Heather, and I know how hard it can feel to get people to do what's expected of them. Trust me, I have 3 kids. I've tried telling people what to do and how. I've tried the traditional training approaches, and I realized that just doesn't work. And that's when I started researching what does work. Now, I help mission-driven leaders use learning to drive performance, build capacity, and make change that lasts. And I'm sharing it all on this podcast. So block your calendar, turn off your Teams or Slack chat, and let's dive in. It's Learning for Good.
Have you ever worked with a coach? Maybe it was a professional coach and you grew in your role or in your leadership. Maybe it was a career coach and you set career goals and went after them. Maybe it was a health coach and you stuck to your workouts and your nutrition plan because of it. There are so many different coaches out there now. And for good reason. Having someone who listens to you, who asks the tough questions, who guides you and holds you accountable, that helps you get clarity and make progress in life and in work. So today I want to talk about the value of executive coaching in particular. As learning and development leaders, we have lots of tools in our toolkit. And when others in our organization come to us with a challenge or an opportunity, we don't always have to point to training. Coaching is one of these alternative options that can help us and help our nonprofits achieve our goals. And while I've talked about coaching from time to time on the podcast, I've never really explored the role of executive coaching. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And I've got Chris Wong with me today to take us down this path of executive coaching. Chris is an ICF-certified coach, and he's worked with leaders across nonprofit, government, and other sectors. This is going to be so good. Let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. Chris is an ICF-certified executive coach, licensed therapist, and leadership development professional. With nearly a decade of experience, Chris has created multiple leadership and career development initiatives, trained and coached hundreds of leaders, and led numerous successful organizational projects. Chris is also a skilled facilitator and public speaker in a variety of settings and brings years of experience navigating nonprofit, health insurance, and government systems. Currently, Chris works with new, purpose-driven leaders to navigate chaotic and turbulent transitions. This includes helping leaders navigate difficult conversations, resolve conflicts, create high-performing cultures, build engagement, and find success in new roles. His expertise spans diverse areas, including leadership development, strategic planning, leading change, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Heather. Hopefully I can live up to that introduction.
I am so excited for this conversation, and I know that you can because we have connected a few times before. We have gotten to know each other over the past year or so, and this episode, I feel like, is a long time coming. I am excited for people to learn from you and hear more about what you do and also about executive coaching through the course of our conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited because I love talking to other learning and development professionals.
Yeah, same. So I know that we are going to focus our conversation mostly today around executive coaching. I'm excited for that. I haven't spent a lot of time talking about executive coaching on the podcast. And so I think this is just going to be such a great episode for people. But before we dive into that, I always like to hear a little bit about your career journey and how did you get where you are today? I read off several different areas of experience and expertise in your from your coaching certification. You're a licensed therapist. You've done leadership development, strategic planning, change work, and DEI work as well. So how did that all come together? How does it tie together? Tell us about your career journey.
Yeah, I'm always honest about this. I started as a licensed therapist and I just got burned out. I was working in a really intense environment and a population. So it was just very intense. I won't describe it here. But as part of my work, I was doing some facilitation on the side, some training and co-facilitation. And I learned that I really liked that stuff. And so I moved into learning and development. And I just fell in love with the entire process of how do you help other people get better? How do you help them perform at a higher level? And as you know, the one question that always haunts all of us learning and development professionals is how do we maintain that behavior change long term after a training event? And the conclusion I came to, the research I just got passionate about was leadership. That's where, because they're the people that can be with the employees every single day. They can coach them, they can set the culture. And so the nonprofit I was at the time tapped me to lead and build a leadership and organizational development department. And I just love that work because it was the first time it happened. And so I got to build it from the ground up, leadership development programs, mentorship programs. And I was increasingly seeing the need for coaching because that was also another research oriented thing that saw really good results on an ongoing basis. And so I was leaning, a lot of my work was they paid for me to get an executive coaching certification. And a lot of the programs I built were starting to move in that model of smaller group cohorts, multiple sessions, individual coaching or small group coaching. And I was seeing good results with it. And so that just led me to just keep doing it on my own when I left on my own is how do I do this for other organizations that also need that work on a larger scale? And just, I want to have a bigger impact and be able to do good in the world. So that's where I've been able to do today, working with lots of different types of organizations and leaders.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe you're in the behavior change part because you knew you were talking to me. But we often in LIT, right? We think about training as the end product, but training is not the end product. Change is the end product. And we are doing training or anything else, the goal is change in some way. And so when you think about how do you actually sustain that change after the training is over, after that momentum is kind of
Right.
on a little bit, right? They're back in their day to day. They're getting sucked into different meetings and different projects and their time is tight. How do you keep that momentum going? And coaching is one way that we can do that, building the leadership to be able to support their teams. This is a huge part of being able to sustain that change. So thank you for that little plug on behavior change.
Yeah.
That's often when I'm talking about coaching, that's often the context that I talk about it in is like, this is a way to make sure that your people managers are supporting their staff, that you're creating that change, that you're sustaining, you're providing accountability, you're providing this place of reflection and autonomy, right? And that's great, but I've not really zoned in on executive coaching as a topic for the podcast. And so I am excited to do that with you today. Before we really get into the specifics of executive coaching, I would love to start just by defining it so everybody is speaking about this in the same way. So when you think executive coaching, what is it? Who is it for? And how is it different than maybe other leadership coaching or other types of coaching that people offer?
Yeah. So I think of executive coaching as the one-to-one, mostly one-to-one supportive environment where we are helping a executive or senior leader think through larger organizational issues like strategy, alignment, influence, communication. And you're right that there's a lot of different types of coaching, and you can just even call yourself a generic coach, really, if you wanted to. But the big difference I see between leadership coaching and executive coaching is leadership coaching is really focused on specific skill sets of like maybe even a level of like frontline, mid-level managers of how do you give feedback? How do you coach? How do you delegate? Like those real tactical skills. Leadership coaching tends to be more focused on that. Whereas executive coaching is thinking more big picture. How does your actions work across an entire organization? How are you leading larger teams or multiple levels? And how are you using that influence and communication skills to align people? And so I think of it more of that on a different scale and a different, narrower focus if you're doing leadership coaching.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure executive coaching, when we think about executive coaching, right, there are components of leadership coaching But to your point, this is a larger scale. You're not thinking about leading one team. You're thinking about leading multiple teams. You're thinking about leading organizational strategy. You're thinking about leading change across an organization. And so it's just a slightly right scale that you're coming at this with. So what role does executive coaching play in a portfolio of other leadership and people development offerings? Like, what's the value of executive coaching versus something else?
I think it's one of those things where you could compare it to mentoring also, because mentoring is also like generally a small group, like one-to-one relationship. But mentoring, as I've always used it, is always more somebody who's been through that exact experience with you. Like, you're a CEO of a nonprofit. Your mentor is probably going to be a CEO of a nonprofit in the past or currently. And so they can share their explicit experiences. Whereas coaching, you don't necessarily have to have the exact same experience, but you have the skill set to help draw out the strengths of somebody using it. And so it's the difference between reading a book and, reading a book like Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's the difference between reading that book and then actually implementing it and using those skills and personalizing it. And so that's the power of coaching, is being able to have that one-to-one accountability partner and that sounding board so you can talk through, how do I implement this? How do I do this? What are the blind spots that I'm not even seeing in myself? But now I have this other person that's trained to listen, to think with me, and to be that sounding board and even notice the things, even the gaps that I am not noticing. And that's why I think of it as a really powerful tool in addition to training. Like, training is like something you can do really good at scale. Like, coaching is hard to do at scale. Like, it's really more of a one-to-one or small group experience that works really well. So that's where I see it, as like it's a supplement and a way to help you increase your implementation and actually doing it.
This is kind of a side note, but as you were talking, I'm also thinking about the skill of the executive coach, right? And how systems thinking probably plays into that, like being able to see all the different pieces and how they're playing out so that you can identify those blind spots or those unintended consequences or risks that might be involved and help be a thought partner and coach somebody through decisions and, reflection and things like that. So definitely a unique skill set for the executive coach. And I love your distinction between, training is often something that can be done at scale versus coaching really is about that kind of personal support, personal accountability, personal growth over the course of the coaching relationship. So bring that to life for us a little bit. What does executive coaching look like? Is it a one-time event? Is it ongoing for months or years? You mentioned one-on-one already, but sometimes small group. Just paint a picture for us of what this looks like so that as learning and development folks are listening and they're thinking, well, maybe that's something that I need to explore for, my executive team. What does it look like? Bring it to life.
Yeah. So you can have groups go through it together. You can have team coaching if you want to have your team go through it together. But small groups, if you do that model, it ends up being you're trying to get them to coach each other. So it's not just training, like you're training them how to do something. Small groups will be, how do you get them to start coaching each other through the process and start using that skill set in real time? For me, one-to-one coaching, my engagements start with assessments because you want real data about how somebody's performing, not just what they think they're doing. So it's going to be some kind of assessment of their strengths or style or whatever it might be. And there's like a multitude of kind of assessments in the marketplace. But starting with that and then doing a 360, I'll almost always include a 360 of some sort because I want to know, how are they coming across to everybody else in the environment, in their workforce, in their team, the people they supervise, whoever else, because I think that's super vital. And that tends to be the most important assessment I can do, is because those two assessments will guide what are we working on specifically. Like, they might have a bigger goal of, how do I get my team to collaborate? How do I have our team communicate better across the organization? But really, what are the things you need to change in yourself so that you can move the needle? And so those assessments help us figure out, these are the behaviors we need to fix or change or modify or improve on, whatever it might be. And so then the rest of the engagement is, how do we do that? What does it look like in theory, but also what does it look like in practice? How are you doing that with your leader A, leader B, employee A, employee B, team A, team B. How does that look? How are we implementing it? What's the roadblocks? Where are you still getting in your own way? And a lot of that is then continued maintenance and behavior change and ongoing support. So, but it starts with a lot of assessment, and the engagements last as long as they kind of really need to. Like, I think a lot of people default to 6 or 9 months, but you could also really do it in 3 months. It just changes the scope. If you have a 3-month engagement, you want to work with somebody just for a short time, you're really just focusing on one specific thing. You're only going to have time to do one behavior change because, as you know, and as your listeners probably know from listening to this podcast, behavior change takes time no matter what. And so you can do 3 months if that's all you want to do, but your scope is going to be really focused. Like, I just want to be able to give feedback to this team on this thing.
Do you wish you could connect with other nonprofit learning and development leaders? I know what it feels like to want someone to bounce ideas off of and to learn from, someone who really understands you and your work. Imagine if you could have a simple way to meet people in the field, ask questions, and share information. That's why I created the Nonprofit Learning and Development Collective, where nonprofit L&D, talent management, and DEI leaders can connect with each other quickly and easily in a virtual space. When you join this community, you will walk away with a new, diverse, and powerful network and a sounding board for your staff development needs. So if you're ready to exchange ideas and collaborate with your peers, come join the Nonprofit L&D Collective.
When you're working with organizations and you're choosing an assessment, do you have a go-to assessment, or does it vary based on what their goals are?
I have 2 that I try to stick between just because I'm familiar with them the most. I use either Clifton Strengths if there's just a generic, like, I want to be a better leader and improve in lots of different ways. If it's a communication focused one, I like DISC. I think DISC is a better one for communication focus. And then I'm starting to explore some of the other ones like Hogan. I've heard really good things about, and some of the other ones are really good. But also I'll say this. Sometimes there's an Enneagram. Like, I've worked with some churches and they use Enneagram a lot. Yeah. And so we'll use that. Like, if there's one that they've already used, they really like that one for whatever reason, we'll just use theirs. I don't need to necessarily stress them out with another assessment. But as long as we do the 360, that's the important thing for me, is getting like real-time data from how they're presenting in the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the more we can use data, the better off we are generally in L&D. And so I love that you're starting with an assessment and doing that 360 process as well.
Yep.
You have worked across different sectors, including nonprofit, and you've done a lot of coaching over the years. So what impact have you seen from executive coaching, either in your own life or in your clients? What's the impact?
Yeah, I've seen, number one is I see the increased confidence. They start doubting themselves less. They don't feel like they're lost and they don't know what to do. They feel like, okay, I have the skill sets. I can do this, especially because my approach is very strength-based. I'm not trying to tell you, you're not good at this, so let's build this up. Let's focus on what you are good at. You're good at this, and let's use those strengths and to shore up some of the other things you maybe have, it doesn't come naturally to you, or lean on your team in that way. And so I find that there's, number one, a lot of confidence. Like, leaders will often say, okay, now I know what to do next. A lot of times they're coming to me and they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to manage the situation. Obviously, they've never handled it before. So, like, how do I deal with this? Especially if there's economic or political wind changes. How do I handle this? How do I keep my staff engaged? How do I keep everybody else? How do I move our mission forward? So number one is they're like, okay, I'm going to second guess myself less. I don't feel this imposter syndrome as much. They're still there for a little bit, but at least I know, okay, I can rely on my team. I can move forward and do this stuff. And the other things I see are either increased productivity with their teams, or there's less conflict. I worked with this one nonprofit out in Michigan where there were 2 co-executive directors and a director of development. And there was just this major conflict between one of the co-executive directors and the director of development, to the point where this development director wasn't even showing up to work anymore because it was just too much chaos. And that left the executive director scrambling because they had to fill up that gap and try to fill it up. And so they were missing out on revenue. And so it was just learning for the one person who was willing to mediate. It was learning how to just navigate that conflict with each other, create systems so that they could hold each other accountable. And within a month, they were able to work it out and figure out, okay, how are we going to work together? There was a miscommunication. It really was just a miscommunication. And it was as simple as that. For this executive director, she was just in turmoil about like, how do I even like manage the situation? How do I get them to work together? And she thought she needed to increase all these processes or start going like an HR route with this director of development because she wasn't doing her job, which is an option if they continue to not do well. But a lot of it was also, how do we even just communicate and work to get better together? So we solve this problem first. And then also like this one CEO I worked with, he had spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars on consultants trying to create this platform, this software platform for the people they worked with. And they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And just in a very short order of working with him, we changed kind of how he was approaching his team and how he needed to communicate. And his own IT team created the platform in 2 days. And so it was just for him learning to trust and let go like of that founder syndrome and being able to trust his team, delegate, and he's feeling more comfortable and confident and more free time to not feel stressed. So a lot of it is just that increased productivity. Things are getting done in your organization. People are showing up to work and actually invested in the work. But also you don't feel as overwhelmed as a leader. You're not feeling stressed. You're not feeling like the weight of the world is on you and you can move things forward.
Yeah. What I appreciate about what you shared, and I think something that we often miss, right, is there are direct impacts, obviously, in confidence and productivity and decreasing conflict and increasing trust in these areas. But a lot of these that you mentioned are also impacting revenue, or it's decreasing expenses, right? So there are also other larger impacts at play when we have the ability to work together more effectively. And any type of coaching is going to help you do that. But at the executive level, right, there are ripple effects across the organization.
That's right.
As learning and development folks, this is a learning podcast. As learning and development pros, it's our job, right? This is one tool in our toolkit. It's our job to recommend the right solution and not always default to training. So how do we know when executive coaching is the right fit?
I think executive coaching is always the right fit for every executive leader, only because it doesn't always have to be as intense as the engagement I talked to you about. Some leaders can get by with an executive coach. They meet once a month or, even once a year or every few months. It doesn't need to be as intense as like meeting every week or meeting every other week, right? Because they're not going through something. But at that level, you don't have anyone else to talk to really. The higher up you get, it does get lonely only because you have less people you can confide in, less people to bounce ideas off of, right? If you're a CEO, if you're an executive director, if you say something, even if you're brainstorming, your words carry weight. So even if you're just brainstorming an idea, somebody else might take that seriously, like, oh, I need to run with that, or I need to start doing that. Or you're just throwing an idea because you just want to brainstorm. Somebody else gets really excited about it. So they do all this research, they start figuring out what to do. And then they come to you with this proposal and you're like, well, I didn't really want to pursue it. I was just throwing out an idea. And so you're wasting everybody's time. And so it's always good to just have somebody you can talk to and throw ideas off of and even just check in about how you're doing. And could you also do it as a therapist? Yeah, you could also just see a therapist if you really wanted to. There are therapists that do this kind of work also, career counseling and things like this. Executive coaching and leadership coaching is really good for those senior executive leaders because also they're not going to sit in a training event. That's not going to be the best use of their time or your time, right? Because you're not going to be able to come up with enough examples that are relevant to what they're going through. And so having that one-to-one time that's less time intensive for them is a great way to support them. For everyone else, for the mid-level managers, for everyone else, this type of coaching is really good if you're trying to develop somebody. It is not good if they're struggling and you've tried everything else and this is a last-ditch effort. I sometimes get calls for those and I always refuse those because I say, it's not going to work. And I've told leaders this, like, it's not really going to work doing this because I've done it enough where I can change their behavior enough, but we can't change the perception of their leader. And so it's a really losing battle, even if we change their behavior 100%, because yours as their leader, they're always going to have that perception of whatever they were trying to fix before. And so this type of coaching is really good if you're like, I've got this manager, I think they could be really good. I want to put them on a succession plan and let's get them this coach to develop their skill sets and get them even better. So that's where it's really good, that kind of development aspect.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great distinction, using it for development, not punitive purposes. I used to manage 360 assessment internally at a national nonprofit, and it was much the same. People would want to do the assessment to kind of pull out the things that weren't going well and maybe approach it from that lens. And that's not the intent of a 360 assessment, right? So if you're looking to really develop a person in their role or for a future role, coaching is a great way to do that. And to your point, at the executive level, at the senior leadership level, they need somebody who understands them, who understands what they're experiencing, who can help them think through what they're experiencing, what their decisions are. And that's not necessarily going to be training at scale. That's going to be, coaching is going to be a much better fit for that. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about executive coaching and how it fits into the larger portfolio of options that we have in learning and development. I love this episode. I think it's just such a great conversation to have. We don't often think about the executive level. We know they're not necessarily going through training with us all the time. And so we're not always thinking about how we can support them. And this is a great addition to our toolkit to be able to provide that support to the senior leaders in our organizations as well. So thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks. I rarely ever just talk about executive coaching by itself.
Yeah.
So this is a great opportunity to just talk about it.
Executive coaching is one tool in our toolbox, and it is one way to support our senior leaders and our organizations. But this is important because our senior leaders are not always supported in our organizations. You really think about it, to Chris's point, they're not necessarily coming to training and sitting in the same training that you might offer to other people in your organization. And so this is a great way to provide that support, to give them an outlet, to give them some accountability, to give them a place to really work on their own development, their own skill sets, and to think through the strategy and the skills and the alignment that needs to happen across the organization for the whole organization to be effective. And so if you want any of your learning and development strategies to be effective, right, your senior leaders really set the tone for the organization. And so this is a great way to make sure they're getting what they need to. I'm so grateful to Chris to join me today. He does all kinds of different coaching, not just executive coaching, but it was great to hear his perspective on this particular option that we have for our senior leaders. So I'm grateful that he was able to join us today and have this conversation. I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.
Hey friend, was this episode helpful for you? Did you like what you heard? Do you want more content like this? Here are 3 things you can do. Hit subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Share this episode with a colleague. This means so much to me personally. I read every review, but it also helps me learn what content you like most so I can create more of what you want. All right, turn that Teams or Slack chat back on when you're ready, and I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.